So welcome everyone, just for the recording, and I just wanted to say that my name's Sona and I live near Adistana, and I wanted to start this session off with a bit of a just looking at where we've come to so far with the mindfulness of Nature of Mind project. So last month there was a discussion using material of Ian McGilchrist, who wrote a very interesting book called The Master and His Emissary. And basically McGilchrist's theory, I don't know how accurate it is, but it's a very, very interesting idea of a divided brain, where one part of the brain is receiving all the information and kind of determining which parts it will go to, and a lot of the processing of the information that we receive through our senses into the brain gets passed over to what he calls the left side, the left hemisphere of the brain. Apparently, both hemispheres of the brain can do most of the functionalities of that the brain needs to do, or the functionalities that the brain needs to do. But the left side has seemed to become a bit of a specialist in thinking, using rational thought, using language, thinking about things in a kind of linear way, and often very analytical. So it kind of cuts things up and breaks things down into parts. Whereas the right side of the brain has an ability to see more of a wholeness of things, and can't always maybe make rational sense of that wholeness, but it still means that there is knowledge, information being processed by that side of the brain. And Ian McGilchrist, I think he's certainly reading his book and listening to his interviews, he's quite concerned about humanity becoming overly dependent on the left functionality of the brain, as he calls it, the thinking, analytical, conceptual, rational side of the brain, and losing touch with, and also perhaps not placing enough importance upon developing the right side of the brain. So many of us can think very, very well and use that left side of the brain, but the right side can be a bit left out. And then this week we had on Friday we had a little seminar around near-death experiences based on the work of Penny Sartori, and that was very, very interesting, because what you find when you try to make sense of those type of experiences, you're trying to understand it, usually most of us are trying to understand it with our left brain, which is throwing up all sorts of questions, and it's difficult in a way to fully accept that when we die, well, we don't just disappear, that we don't just end. It's not the end of things. There seems to be a growing sort of understanding that consciousness is just a flow of continual things, and that when the body dies, the consciousness continues somehow, not being a fixed thing, but more of a flow of consciousness. It's very difficult to talk about it, and in a way that's what the whole project of Nature of Mind is about, is trying to get a feeling for, a sense of what mind is. And of course, the whole time with this left side of the brain, I'm trying to understand it intellectually. Is the mind this? Is it that? And the other side's kind of saying, you don't need to. You just you've got a mind, and just use it, and just develop it. So if you feel kind of split sometimes, that's probably why, because our brain tends to split things off, and it makes us very, very efficient as human beings. We can do a lot of things with the left side of the brain. We can make a lot of things happen. We can solve illnesses, develop vaccines, and so on. And the right side of the brain can develop all sorts of beautiful works of art. It can appreciate the beauty of the world, and so on. But the idea of near-death experiences kind of brings in a very interesting idea, because if death isn't the end of our being in some way, if we come into this life, we live this life, and then it ends, full stop, nothing happens afterwards, then it raises all sorts of questions for those who think kind of a bit more existentially. What's the purpose of being alive, and why am I here? If you then think that, your consciousness continues afterwards, you may come to the conclusion that that life itself is a kind of way of perhaps developing consciousness. The consciousness can be developed, as we probably all know. We can become more aware, we can become more considerate of other people, we can experience things more deeply, and so forth. And we could see life as a period, a process in which we kind of, when we leave this physical life, we go away with something more than what we came into this life with. And the standard Indian, and certainly the Buddhist approach, is that this process continues like that from one lifetime to another. And sometimes it's described like a flame. It's like consciousness of a candle, and the body dies, the candle goes out, but the flame continues on to another candle. So the flame doesn't die, but it just transfers. So in a sense, what we call me, I, and so on, if you were over-identified with the body, that ends, but our consciousness can continue. So if we start considering and thinking in that way, knowing the mind, knowing consciousness becomes increasingly interesting and more important. So this is pretty much the underlying nature of Buddhism, in a sense, is that we are trying to develop and improve, could even say evolve, our consciousness, our minds, and so we can become more and more. And one of the ways in which we do this is to get to know the mind through meditation. A lot of us just, I mentioned yesterday that when I first took up yoga, at the end of the yoga session that I did, you do this lying down posture. It's called Shavasana, or corpse pose. And when you're lying there for the first time ever, you might recognize or realize that you're just thinking, that thoughts are just pouring through you, and that's what happens. You just got one thought after another. I liken it to a radio that's just chattering away, with one voice talking about something and almost like another voice talking. And for some people, this is quite a aha moment, a sort of a waking up moment, realizing actually most of the time I'm just thinking. And most of the thoughts, if you explored them, and those people that have tried to count the number of thoughts you have and what sort of thoughts you have, estimate there's something like 70 to 90,000 thoughts that you have a day. And most of them you've had before. And quite a lot of them are not very positive. They tend to be kind of looking on the negative side of life. So we get into the habit of just regurgitating or ruminating on these same old thoughts that are just going round and round. And when you start waking up to this fact, you think, well, wouldn't it be nice to actually do something about it, to turn the radio down, maybe to put some better programs on, if you want to use that metaphor of the radio, something more interesting, something a bit more creative. And it's possible to transform your mind so that your mind is more creative, that it can respond in much more creative ways to all the sorts of things that happen to us in life. So Buddhism, I would say that probably a lot of the Buddhist practices, meditation practice, are helping us to kind of tone down the activity of the left brain, if we want to talk about in terms of brain, and up the activity of the right brain. So Buddhists, for instance, had rituals, not just meditations. Meditations can be extremely imaginative ones, as someone said yesterday. They enjoy doing those much more than just being aware of your breathing. And it can, through all the different rituals and things, you can just feel that you are becoming more and more alive. So, but this morning we're not going to do any rituals. We're just going to work with the mind, meditate again. But I'd just like to say a little bit more about motivation. Those of you who practice meditation, I know a lot of you who are in this group have practiced before. And if you're new to meditation, probably the first thing you begin to realize that if you set your mind on a task, like something simple, like just being aware of the in and out flow of the breath, very quickly your interest goes somewhere else. Some people find it boring just watching the breath. Quite honestly, it can be incredibly boring just sitting there, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. And then suddenly your mind thinks, well, why am I doing this? Or wouldn't it be nice if I was reading a book or having some breakfast or doing something else? So the first thing you know or notice when you take up meditation, and which you're probably still dealing with 20 or 30 years later, is that when you set your mind to focus on one thing, it very easily goes to another thing, and then very easily goes to another thing and another thing. And there's lots of associative thoughts as your mind jumps from one thing to another. Some people stay with one thing, like planning an activity or something their day, but the mind is going to what's interesting. So how do you meditate? How do you actually learn to bring your mind to focus on one thing? Well, first of all, you need a certain amount of motivation. You may need to remind yourself why you're doing it, because sometimes you just sit there, you're watching your mind, watching your mind going here and there, you realize you're not doing the focusing on the breath, and you think, why am I bothering? It just seemed to be too much, too hard. So it can be helpful just to remember why you might want to meditate. I've no idea why any of you want to meditate, but usually people come to learn meditation for two reasons. One is that is what you could call psychological or emotional, but basically we feel unhappy, we feel there's something wrong with our life is quite painful. Living the life we're living could be due to a lot of stress of modern life and so on. For other people, it might be more existential, that we're quite happy living our lives, we get along all right, but there's this niggling sort of part saying, what's the point? What am I doing this for? And what's life all about? Why am I here? And you could call that the more existential aspect. That can be unpleasant as well, of course. And usually nowadays, I would estimate that more people come to meditation due to more psychological, mental factors. They're looking for peace and tranquility, a reduction in stress and an increase in well-being and so on. But sooner or later, if you carry on meditating, the existential questions will start creeping in, actually, because you'll start thinking more deeply about things. And if you come because of existential issues to start with, you'll probably start noticing that there are aspects of your being that are getting in the way, the kind of some sort of psychological or habitual things that you have that you have to look at and deal with. Otherwise, very difficult to make progress in meditation. So the two things often come together, and that's a kind of a rather negative way of looking at why you take up meditation. It's because something's wrong. But there's also another aspect to meditation, and that is it seems to open up all sorts of new possibilities, can make your life a lot richer, helps you to not react to things so automatically, so spontaneously, but to have a more creative approach of how you do things. So today we're going to continue with an exploration of mind. On this course, we're not actually going to teach people how to meditate. We're really discussing and exploring approaches to meditation. I think if you're new to meditation or you haven't meditated before, I would strongly recommend that you attend one of Triratna centres or somewhere else where you can learn to meditate by an experienced meditator. You usually need to, as a beginner, quite a bit of structure. So there's much more structured ways of meditating than what we're doing today. I can recommend Triratna. The Adhisthana website is probably a good place to go if you wanted to find more information and explore places where you can get some help in meditating. I often see meditation as like learning a musical instrument. I recently, a few years ago, decided to learn about music, to learn to read music and try to play the piano. And then I went on to a ukulele, which seemed a bit easier. But one of the things I realized when I was learning to play music was that you have to do quite a bit of practice on technique. But technique, just practicing technique. So if you're playing, say, the piano, you would learn to play scales. That was one of the things I had to learn to play, and just train my synapses just so that I could read a note, hit a note, and then play scales over and over again. And sometimes it was a bit uninteresting, even bordering on boring, and frustrating sometimes because it was hard to do. But when you get the hang of it, it's kind of you're feeling so good, and you realise you can actually change yourself. And sometimes you can even produce a bit of music because you can make notes follow one another, and something flows, and it's very, very enriching. But it does need constant practice. I think anyone who practices to become a professional musician practices something like 3 hours a day. So if you wanted to be a really good, efficient meditator, you would probably have to change your life so that you could create 3 hours of practice a day. But I think meditation might be even more difficult than an instrument. But once you can play an instrument, you can join an orchestra. And once you're playing in an orchestra or a choir or singing in a choir, you can have an experience that is wonderful. It's something happens that's more than the sum of the parts, and those who have experienced that will know what I'm talking about. So meditation can bring a lot of richness and bring a lot of new things, new wonderful things to your life. So today we're going to go back to just experiencing really what happens when I set myself the task of doing something simple, relatively uninteresting. How can I remain focused on it? So there are two ways of approaching that. Is one, and we're going to be becoming aware of the breath. Yesterday I mentioned about a metaphor of a boat, say like a yacht being anchored in a little bay. That's how I see it, a nice sunny sort of Mediterranean bay, clear water, and you're there on the yacht, the sails are down, you're just still, a little bit of a wind, but not much. You drop the anchor fixes you in the bottom, and your boat is just sort of blown around a little bit, but it doesn't really move very far from the spot. That's the whole point of the anchor. And you can use this analogy for doing this practice of what you could call mindfulness, or being aware of breathing, so that you just use the breath as an anchor to come back to. And it's a bit like the boat, it will wander off, and then you'll remember, oh yeah, I was supposed to be anchored to my breathing. So you just come back, and you don't give yourself a hard time when you wander off, because that's what your mind will do, and that's what we're exploring really. The other way of approaching this is you start off with this being anchored on the mind, and then you notice your mind wandering off. And then if you can be more aware of what your mind's actually doing, like what thoughts you're having, or what feelings you're experiencing, you could think, oh, that's interesting. And you may, if you wanted to go far enough in that way, you could start analysing, because the left side of the brain will start doing that, analysing what thoughts am I having? You could divide these thoughts up into thoughts about wanting something pleasant that you want to bring towards you, thoughts about something you don't want, or something you don't like, maybe a person or some situation, you want to push it away. So very often we have this kind of, I want this, I don't want that approach, and this is what causes a lot of stress in life. And some of us are very, very good at just doing nothing. We're kind of, our thoughts are wandering around. We don't know, we're not particularly wanting anything. We might be thinking about, the best way to, with the best route to go to work in, or to do something. I even find myself trying to multiply numbers together, which completely seems ludicrous, but it's a bit like just keeping my mind active sometimes. So you could have something that's you're craving for, something that you're pushing away, or that you're just kind of confused about, you don't really know what you're doing. You can develop your ability to watch your mind do that. And then when you notice it's doing that, you don't want to stay there analysing it too long. You can just bring it back to the breath and be anchored there. So that's all I'm going to say now. And we're going to practice this. I know when people are being led through meditations, it can be slightly irritating if someone talks too much. So if you're a beginner, some people prefer that someone's talking and holding you, kind of reminding you to come back. So it's very, very difficult as a leader in the meditation to get it just right. In fact, you can't get it right for everyone. So if I'm talking too much for you, then just see how you react to that. That would be probably another thought, like, oh, we should shut up. And you think, oh, that's a thought. And then you would think, oh, yes, an unpleasant thought. Okay, that's interesting. And so you can work with your own mind in that way. And the whole process becomes incredibly interesting. Even breathing becomes interesting. You can ask yourself, how do I know I'm breathing? Where am I breathing? What is breathing? You might start analysing, what's it for? And it's keeping you alive. And you might think, well, wow, wonderful. I'm breathing, I'm alive. And you can rejoice in that. So all sorts of things can happen if you don't just sit there and think, oh, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. Oh, what have I gone to now? I've gone to that. It can just become kind of very repetitive and slightly boring. So you do need to sit up a little bit and make an effort, but not too much effort. If you make too much effort, it becomes counterproductive and you just tense up. So the idea is to be alert, and you could call this practice watching the mind by anchoring it to your breathing. It's like a breathing anchor and mind watching what happens in your mind, and not trying to think too much about it and letting the thoughts come, acknowledging them. You may be carried away, oh, it's an interesting thought, and then you can just let it go and then see if you can come back to this training of remaining kind of more still, more anchored to your breath. So just introducing a little bit of ritual. I'm going to ring a bell at the start of the meditation. That wasn't me ringing the bell, that was me dropping the bell ringer on the bell. So just to help those of you that are new to meditation, or you feel like you're you'd like to think of yourself as being a complete beginner again. You don't know what's going to happen. And if you can put aside all your expectations of what you want from meditation, perhaps just focus on sensations in your body, first of all. So we have this body, wonderful body. For some people it goes wrong. It goes wrong for all of us at some time or another. But usually it functions pretty well. And it has a certain mass, weight. And as you sit there, you may have a sense of that weight being, that sense of weight of the body is created by the force of gravity holding us down. And we can feel, it's as though we can feel this force in different parts of our body. I wouldn't go looking for the force because you won't find it, but what you can find is sensations. You can feel your bottom on a chair, on a stool or cushion. And that's because a lot of the weight of the upper body is being pressed down. If you're sitting on a chair, you can feel your bottom on the chair, your feet on the floor. If you're sitting kneeling or cross-legged, you may initially feel a certain amount of tension in the joints. Sometimes that tension can be released. Any tension in the body can be released to some degree by being aware of it. And you could do that by imagining you're breathing into that part. You're not really breathing into it, but you're connecting your breathing with that particular sensation of tightness, of tension in the body. And as you breathe out, it may trigger your nerves, your neurons to release some of the tension. Breathing out is often a very calming thing to do. I'll say something more about that in a moment, about breathing and calming. But for the time being, just kind of moving through the body, feeling the weight. Very often people, when they're sitting, become aware of tension, tightness in different parts, particularly around the shoulders and the back. There may not be very much you can do about it. It may be you need to adjust your posture. You don't need to sit still and just experience pain or difficulties. You can move, readjust. And a lot of this tension in the neck and shoulders and back is caused by how we place, or how the head is aligned with the rest of the body. The head is a very heavy limb of the body. And if it's falling forwards, it's going to pull quite a lot of muscles into tension in the back and the shoulders. And if it's tipping to one side, it's going to do the same with other muscles. So even with your eyes open, to start with, you could check if your head is straight, because your two eyes, if you've got two eyes working, that can give you a horizontal line that tells you if your head is straight, and the chin can come in, or it may be better to think of the top of the back of the head being lifted up, and this will align your head with the chin, feeling as though it's moving in slightly. And throughout this meditation, it's quite good to come back to your posture, your sensations in your body, and just check what's going on. And you could turn your attention to the fact you're breathing. How can you tell What tells you you're breathing? Is it the sensation of air passing through your nose, into your lungs? Is it the movement of the expansion of the chest or belly? You have a diaphragm in your chest that's pressing down when you breathe in. It pushes the organs beneath it outwards. So there's got a lot of movement going on in your body as you breathe. Very minute if you're not breathing very deeply. And for most people, not perhaps everyone, but for the majority of people, just becoming aware of your breathing has a very calming effect on you, on your mind, calming effect on your brain, calming effect on the autonomic system that is on watch for any dangers, distractions of any brilliant ideas. All that can be calmed down by simply enjoying more the breath coming in and going out. If breathing in and out kind of makes you feel uncomfortable, then maybe focus on the sensations in the belly or in your back. These will be caused by the breath coming in and going out. Or you may just like to feel the air flowing in and flowing out. So there's all sorts of things you can discover about the breath. And I would imagine it's the rhythm of the breathing that's very calming, apart from the physiology of oxygen being taken to the lungs and so forth. But the feeling of a rhythm, of a flow in and a flow out. The beginning and the end, which ends with a new beginning. This is perhaps a reflection or an image for life, coming into being, going out, sensations coming in and dissolving, thoughts coming in and dissolving. So ideally, the thoughts that arise in the mind, when they arise, you notice them as best you can and let them go. And someone said yesterday that they spend a lot of time and try to meditate planning things. So sometimes we have what you could call more emotionally charged thoughts. that we keep coming back to. We notice them, but it's as though they're too dominant in our mind. And the way we could approach being with these thoughts is akin to, I call it the horse whisperer technique. It's a bit like if you want to train a wild horse, it seems to be better not to force it to do things, but to try to get up close and make friends with it. So to use this analogy with breathing, if you are finding yourself just being constantly pulled in a certain direction, certain thoughts, go with them, give yourself permission to think them, and at the same time, see if you can be aware of your breathing while you're thinking of those thoughts. Kind of multitasking. You just give yourself permission to think that thought, and then in the background there's still the breathing going on, this rhythm of breath coming in, the air coming in and going out. And if you're just drifting, one thought's just coming in after another, well, just notice that you're drifting, like a boat just drifting around. And you have an anchor, you come back to your breathing. If you're drifting and a bit sleepy, you might make a little bit more effort to come back and focus on the breath, but not too much effort that's causing tension. You have to decide what you need to do today, in the mood, in the way you are at this moment. What we may begin to realize that although we have a lot of stillness in the body, sometimes there are unpleasant sensations from just sitting still. Sometimes there are tensions which we can release a little, but maybe not completely. Overall, there's a kind of stillness to the body, but there's often a lot of activity going on in the mind. A whole city of activity. And focusing on the breath is helping us to find a little space, a little park bench where we could sit, watch all that activity going on around us without being too caught up with it. Like the noise, the traffic of our own mind. Too occupied to notice the more beautiful things, more vibrant, bright, enjoyable aspects to sitting still. And every now and again, just becoming more aware of your posture. You may need to adjust slightly if you're tensing up, or if you have pain that's causing you to be more focused on the pain than anything else. Yes, if you can find another way of sitting, you can adjust. And coming back to being alive to your breathing. And it's probably good not to think in terms of watching your breathing, but actually being your breathing. You are just breathing. It's an experience. And it's an experience of the mind wandering off as well. It's another experience. And what you may begin to experience is that your mind isn't a brain thing. Consciousness isn't in the brain, it's in the brain, but not just in the brain. I guess maybe it's all around us. It's rather mysterious. It is just mysterious consciousness. And it's useful to include the whole body whole body awareness. As you breathe, as you become more aware of what's happening, the processes of thinking, feeling, ideas forming and dissolving, emotions arising, being accepted. They often begin to dissolve into stillness. And every now and again you have a sense that the mind is becoming like a mill pond, calm, stillness, the fog, if there is a fog of the water being polluted with algae or dyes, too much plant life, maybe it begins to clear. Maybe all the ripples or waves begin to die down. And you may even get a sense of clarity. As though something new and amazing may emerge. It may be good to also to reflect on the fact that when the mind becomes still, it doesn't just experience stillness. It can experience tranquility, but it's maybe the analogy would be of a wild horse. If one recognizes one's mind as being a bit wild, it's really difficult to tame. It seems to have a life of its own. But the image of a horse, a wild horse that's unbroken, is one of energy. There's something beautiful about all that energy. But there's something even more beautiful about that energy flowing into an activity, kind of bringing together of all the different aspects of mind into a constant flow. Can have a tranquility, often seems to give the impression of being still and quiet, but it could also be the tranquility of a mighty river, a powerful horse galloping, or a river flowing, two different metaphors, but all this energy coming together, a vast amount that is all there within all of us. So coming from the depths of our being. Powerful energy, beautiful, bright, the energy we need to deal with being alive, being human, flowing together. And lastly, we could just reflect that this energy that we have, in a sense, is part of everything. There's well over 100 of us all together, sitting still, spread out in many countries, many different places at least, all doing the same thing, bringing together kind of wholeness of being. And we might just reflect and become aware of other people without necessarily looking at the screen, just knowing there are people there meditating, just like we are, like I am. As human beings, we long for contact, for connection. It's what makes us human. Maybe one of the things that we find fulfilling in life is bringing that sense of wholeness, not just to ourselves, but to friends, family, people around us. connecting in a deeper kind of way. One mind touching another mind, flowing together. I realise that some of you, particularly those in Europe, may need to leave now because it's 8 o'clock here, 9 o'clock in Europe, and different times elsewhere. But don't move too quickly. You might like to just have a little bit of a stretch, move the body around, feel the body waking up. And one of the approaches to meditation, it's quite useful after you've practiced meditation, is just to reflect on how it went for you. And did you learn anything? So something you could bring into the practice when you do it again. So it's always useful. Sometimes people wait for the bell, and the bell goes, and they just jump up. It's almost like a jack in the box spring up. It's quite good just to sit, and even if you didn't have a particularly enjoyable time sitting still, and lots of things happened, it's useful to know that and just to recognise and accept that's what went on. And it's just helps this whole process of becoming more aware of what's going on for you in your consciousness. But we have a bit of time now for those who might want to ask questions. And if you want to put them, Nick's going to collect the questions, hopefully, and he'll tell me, and I'll do my best to answer them.
There's no questions yet, but there's quite a lot of appreciation coming through, and thank yous, and Kathy saying it's great to connect with your minds across space and time, and Amy saying it's wonderful to be led through and to meet you through this medium.
That's the trouble when you sit for quietening the mind. Questions disappear, didn't they? If anyone's had any interesting experiences while they were meditating, you're going to be happy to share them. That would be nice to hear as well.
So Catherine saying, my mind is constantly wanting to seek a self-identity.
Okay. Self-identity. When I was driving here this morning, I was thinking quite a bit about this, that as Buddhists, one's often has this idea that one has to kind of overcome or get rid of a sense of self, of your self-identity. But I don't think it's actually very, very helpful to think in that way. I think it's probably, if that's what Catherine meant by that, I'm not sure. But what I was thinking that we've all got an identity. We all know we've got a self. We are a self, and it would be really odd not to have that self. But we're also beings of habit. You could say our identity is very much based on habit of what we think and who we are. And instead of trying to remove a sense of self, it might be more useful to think in terms of removing unhelpful habits. So, just rejoice in yourself, rejoice in your identity, rejoice in being who you are. Not everyone finds that easy, actually. We often have a bit of a downer on ourselves, but we're pretty remarkable things, aren't we? We're human beings. You could see it like this process of evolution. We've got this body and brain and mind and something, and it's absolutely amazing. And even if we feel a bit down about ourselves, objectively, we're just amazing. But we do sometimes have bad habits, and these bad habits are the things that cause us problems. Where we may be in the habit of craving for too many things, not getting them, being frustrated. We could look at some of these sort of, as we become more and more aware of what we do in our mind, we can work on the habits that we have, and we can feed the good ones, the ones that perhaps bring joy, bring spaciousness, bring a sense of expansion of the mind. And we could work on kind of reducing the energy we put into the other habits of things we do that we know make us feel tight and limited, eventually making us unhappy, really, because we're dissatisfied with who we are when that happens. So instead of thinking in terms of identity as a kind of a thing that we have, I personally find it more useful thinking in terms of I am just my thoughts, I'm my views, I'm my habits, and all these things I can change. I mean, I can't really change the way I look very much. I can shave my head, and I could lose some weight. I could do a few things, but that wouldn't be very important. But what I could do with my mind is massive. How I could transform my mind. It takes a lot of time and training, but it starts with just paying attention to, becoming aware of what we're actually doing. And by the way, this in Buddhism is what's called Buddhist Ethics. It's simply working with your mind to reduce the things that cause you suffering, maybe other people suffering, and limit you, and then feeding the habits that we have, or the things that we know that bring joy and bring some, you could call love into the world, into our life, that make us feel bigger, feel kind of more proud of ourselves being a human being who is able to be generous and kind and giving and so on. So this is really, one talks about morals and ethics, but in Buddhism it's kind of very practical. It's just, I'm not even sure it's Buddhism, really. It just seems like being human, like you could just carry on being miserable by making yourself miserable, or you can start trying to become sort of less so by creating more positive habits and just seeing what works for you. But having the confidence in yourself as being able to change, which is really important. If you haven't got that confidence, if you have to have one belief in life as a Buddhist, it's the belief that you can change. If you think you can't change and you're stuck, then maybe you need to sort of reflect on that more and just notice actually everything's changing. Why are you so different? Are you kind of an absolute, perfect, unchanging being, or are you also in the process of constantly changing? So if you're accepting you're like everything else, everything's changing, why don't you just think about changing for what makes you feel bigger, better, greater, more? And it's a very positive message, isn't it? That we can all become more and more on the way to the most, whatever that is. But there's nothing stopping us apart from our own habits. So, and one can't make small of that. It's very, very difficult to change habits, of course. But the first thing to recognize is that there would be some advantage in changing those habits and learning how our minds function in terms of watching our thoughts and emotions and things, and giving more weight to the ones that we find helpful and positive, kindly ones, and less weight, less attention to the ones that are unhelpful. Well, that's a bit of a...
So Ida has a question. I'll allow her to unmute
Yeah.
if she can speak it.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Sona.
Hello.
You can hear me fine, right?
Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. First of all, I found the meditation and very helpful. And whatever you say is very inspirational. It was a very pleasant experience. And I wanted to share what was interesting for me, which is maybe not very interesting for others, but this is what I do during meditation as well. I'm not kind to myself. And I caught myself when before meditation, you had told us to maybe categorize our thoughts during meditation. And I caught my thoughts 100%, almost 100% were negative, usually towards myself. Or full of fear, very fearful thoughts, stressful thoughts. And what really helped me was your analogy to the wild horse, because I was also unkind when I caught myself during those unkind, unskillful thoughts. I was like, you did it again, kind of very gently. I noticed that you're drifting away, you have drifted away, come back. But with the wild horse analogy, I could sense that I wasn't really totally drifting away. I was in control. Yeah. Although I had drifted away, I was still with the breath and I was still in control. So that was a very, very good feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much for that.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks so
much. But I don't know how to change, Sona. I don't know how to, maybe just being aware that my thoughts are full of fear and negative thoughts for others and myself. Maybe that'll help me change.
Well, it sounds to me like you do know what to do and you're doing it and you just need to keep doing it, that whenever, and you're not alone in this. So many people have negative thoughts, probably the majority of all our thoughts and what you could call negative. They're about us and self-centeredness and what we need, what I need, what makes me happy, and sort of kind of not very generous in a way. But we do have lots of very, very positive thoughts, and even the thought of doing something about changing yourself is extremely positive. So something to rejoice in. You can smile at yourself, go, just had a positive thought. And once you've had one positive thought, you can have two positive thoughts, and so on. You can have moments of peace, and you can have more moments of peace, and everything can change. But it is a slow process. You can't get away from that, and you shouldn't. The danger is you think you can just change easily, and you find you can't. Then that's a real downer, and it's just reinforcing the sense that I'm useless. I can't do these things. So I don't want to play down the difficulty of changing. But if you see it as a challenge, and like human beings really benefit from challenges. You just, some of us think life is enough of a challenge just living, but challenge to do something more interesting. It's quite a useful way of approaching things, I think. So when you take up a challenge, you always fail. That's the whole point of a challenge, that you're failing all the time, but you're also overcoming your failure, and you do it again and again and again, and you get somewhere. So, yeah.
So Ming is asking, I sometimes have music playing when I'm meditating. What should I do about that?
What, in his head?
In his head, yeah, I assume.
Okay. Well, I don't know really. I don't have music playing in my head, but I would practice enjoying it. You know, maybe you can enjoy the beat and the rhythm of the music, and you could breathe with it, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, bum bum bum, breathing in, breathing out, feeling it relaxing. You know, you may change the music you're playing in your head and see what happens to that. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to get a report on sort of different ways of practicing with music playing in your head. I think if you just try to stop it, it's probably counterproductive. You just produce some other tune that's going. So accept it and just think, well, is it a pleasant thing? Is it something I want to happen? Is it, you know, what sort of music is it? Whatever. You could just sort of use that sort of analytical function to just work with that for a bit, but not just forcing it away. I don't know if that's helpful. I just have problems in my mind that I want to solve usually, so I wish I had music sometimes. Might be able to write a good song.
So Viraja is asking, would you say something please about being sleepy during meditation?
Ah, yes, I was thinking of saying something about being sleepy when we were meditating, and depends on what time of the day. I think you're in Australia, aren't you? And Viraja. So you're going to probably be in a time of day when you feel a bit sleepy. But what I've found helpful when I've been on retreats and so on and doing a lot of meditation and times of the day that I'm sleepy, I sometimes just give myself permission to go to sleep. I just sit and fall asleep. And usually, if I do that, I almost like have this sense of, well, sometimes my head goes like that in a jerk, and I probably get a shot of adrenaline going through my body. But if you're not fighting sleep, you sometimes feel less sleepy, and you might even have a little sleep, and then you wake up quite bright. That's been my experience. So you know, it might be useful just to say, "Oh, I'm feeling sleepy. I'll have a 2 or 3 minute sleep." You know, and then you can spend another 20, 25 minutes being awake. So it's if you're kind of working on feeling sleepy, you know, I'm really tired, I've got to wake up, you end up just in a battle really between trying to keep yourself awake. If you can do other things, like you can open your eyes and look around a bit, and you can also do walking meditation if you're very sleepy. Everyone I think is in a room on their own, so you can get up anytime in this way of doing things and do a walking meditation and keep you awake. It's difficult to sleep while you're walking. So I hope that's all I can think of really. Maybe other things people could do.
So Becca's saying, I had quite a difficult thought and it felt heavy in the left-hand side of my head. I tried to breathe and to relax and to let go, but a sense of it remained as heaviness in my head for a little while.
Yeah. It's quite interesting that you felt that you had a heaviness in the left side of your head. When I came across McGilchrist and I thought of developing the right side of my brain, I wondered if I could actually experience the right side of my brain. And I started focusing on it. And I actually could feel as though it was as though my awareness, my paying attention to the right side of my brain made it more alive. And so if you can actually feel that something's happening in one side, then you recognize, well, you've got another part of your brain that you may be able to feel as well. And it might have more lighter, brighter aspects to it which may counterbalance or help to resolve the issues that are causing the tightness. Usually people get, if you think about it, a lot of us experience fear because we're thinking about things that are frightening. If we stop thinking about things that are frightening, usually the fear is not there. It's not always, it may be in the background somehow, but usually our thoughts and our analysis of situations, certainly in my mind, because I'm quite a thinking type person, produce fear. And then I have to kind of accept that's what I'm feeling quite fearful, and do something about it. What I do, if I'm feeling fearful in the day, for instance, I get up and do things and move around and do a task like washing up or something. But what I've come to realize that fear is an interesting thing. You have an autonomic, something part of your brain will produce fear when there's a threat to you, a real life threat. But looking at most of you who I can see with your cameras on, I can't see anything threatening you at the moment. There is no dog or big tiger or something in the background about to attack you. So any fear that's coming is probably being self-produced, and it's not easy to stop that being produced. But it's good to know that that's what's happening. We do actually produce a lot of the anxiety and fear through the habit of the way we behave and so on. You will find it, if you're the sort of person that watches the news about the war and you're doing it all day long, you'll probably at the end of the day feel more and more fearful. If you just watch it once a day, you'll probably forget about the war for a good part of the day. And then you might feel guilty that you're not worrying about all the people who are dying in the war. But then that's just all thoughts. It's not doing anyone any good, actually, worrying. And if you're going to do something, make a donation or whatever, that's positive. You can do those sort of things. But the rest of the time, if you can work with your mind, you can just see that so much is just the production of the habit of being you, thinking your thoughts. And you can change that. So you've already started changing it, practicing sitting still, watching your breathing, and noticing that you're having thoughts. And then you can either let the thoughts go or breathe with the thoughts, breathe with the fear, and things begin to change.
So Natalie Tampini is saying, had a brief sensation of floating whilst meditating, which hasn't happened before.
So this is something to maybe watch out for, those of you who are fairly new to meditation, or even those of you who go a bit deeper in meditation. Sort of strange things can happen, and sometimes they're very, very pleasant. I think I would associate floating with being very pleasant. It's almost like floating out of the restrictions of my body. I would imagine that was very pleasant. Sometimes you can have feelings like you're falling. It can be quite frightening and disconcerting. And what you need to kind of remember is you're just having an odd little thing happening. It's best to not sort of blow it up into either a great wonderful thing, because then you'll be expecting it to come back again and be disappointed when it doesn't. Or if it's uncomfortable, it will probably just pass. It's just what happens in the mind when you give the mind space to kind of readjust itself and go deeper. Things can, all sorts of things can emerge. Sometimes, think traumas and things like that can emerge as well. If it's a really serious one, you probably may need to seek some professional help. But a lot of people just experience things coming up and they recognize they're just things coming up, and you just allow them the space to come up, maybe grief or something like that. Let it come up, and it will go. And just be kind to yourself. So much you can say about all these things, but I better restrict myself. Anything else?
Yep, so Amy is saying sometimes the experience of breathing is very present, but it's tangled up with the thinking in the background. How can I gently sharpen the breathing and fade out the thinking?
Well, if it's sort of happening naturally, you're doing something that's probably already making it happen if it's going into the background. I suspect that almost everyone who meditates will have a little bit of thinking going on in the background. Even when you go really deeply into your meditation, there's part of you it's not exactly thinking, but you're knowing that you're going deeply into your meditation. So it's probably something you have to accept. There's a bit of, you're never going to be completely free of thinking. And maybe you don't even need to be, or you shouldn't be. But it's where the main part of your focus is that's really important. And if you can keep it coming back to the one thing, that will dominate more and more, and probably find the thinking just gets attenuated increasingly, so that it's not so tight and like a lump, but just sort of spread out like a vibration somewhere in the background. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think it will happen naturally, maybe. Maybe you're not worried about it anyway. Sorry if I said don't worry about it. Most of us have thinking in the foreground and the breathing in the background a bit. So it's, we're having to swap that around. Okay, I just would like to remind you that if you do need any more instruction in meditating, that it's very useful to learn different techniques of meditating. And I don't really know about other Buddhist centres. I've only ever been to a Triratna Buddhist Centre, I think, my whole life. I have met other Buddhists, of course, but I know in our Triratna Buddhist centres, people teach two types of meditation to beginners. One is mindfulness of breathing, which is usually done in 4 stages. So it's really good when you're a beginner to have structure, and that you can just move from one phase to another, and then eventually you can kind of allow yourself to experiment much more. And then the other meditation is about developing more loving kindness. It's called Padmaloka, of a kind of universal loving kindness. What I said before, it makes us really human, being able to experience joy, happiness, compassion for those who are suffering, and so forth. And that comes about from allowing our hearts, if it's a metaphor, to open and for love to flow more freely. And some people find that way of meditating far more effective than being aware of the breathing. So there'll be someone in this project that will be doing more compassionate type meditations. I'm not sure who at the moment, but Vidyamala, I think, is coming teaching next month. So you may find that gets developed. But if you're new to meditation, it is good to go and learn these techniques, and it gives you a kind of something to come back to and keep practicing with. Makes it a lot easier. And if you're a sort of an old hand, as it were, at meditating, sometimes it's good to go back to the techniques and just do them again, because you sometimes can get into habits that are not always helpful. And so yeah, it's useful just to think of yourself as a beginner. Could even go back to a Triratna centre where no one knows you and pretend to be, people who are in Triratna. Could do that. Anyway, hopefully there's quite a lot of you that are not in Triratna and are just joining this project, and I'm so pleased to have you here. So I think is there anything else I need to remind people of? I think we're more or less. Any more burning questions? So I think we could just open up to just letting everyone share their joy with each other and say goodbye if you want to. You can unmute everyone if you wanted to, Nick.
I loved it. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you. Nick, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Sona. Everyone. Thank you. Cool.
Bye. Thank you very much. So